Hello and welcome to this Astranti financial training bite-sized video. And today's bite-sized video is all about something that plays a big part in the new E1 syllabus, because a lot of the E1 syllabus is focused on the changes to the finance function. So I thought it'd be a really useful topic today to set you off on your way to make sure you get the grades that you deserve, is to have a look at the reconfiguration of the finance function. How is it changing and why is it changing? Now, before we begin this section, perhaps we should start with a very simple question and ask, what is reconfiguration? Well, as I think I mentioned in the introduction, reconfiguration just means rearranging. And in the sense that we're talking about today, the rearrangement is of the finance function. And so a formal definition is like the one I've put on screen, would be changing the structure and the organization of the department. So reconfiguration of the finance function itself, the actual department. Now when there's restructuring or structuring of the finance function taking place, there needs to be a few things that are understood and taken into account before it's done. And they are the business environment, organizational strategy, organizational structure, and the life cycle stage. So let's take a look at each one of these in turn. Now, we've already mentioned in the previous section the business environment, and we've already stated that changes in the business environment can affect the finance function. And in the business environment section, we're talking about these changes affecting size and focus of the department. So let's imagine that we are going through a period of recession. Then actually the focus on the department may be that they have to focus more on cost controls, that they may have to reduce the size of the finance function in a bid to kind of control those costs, and they may have to move staff onto roles that are focusing on budgeting and cost review. Again, to make sure that that cost control is given as much emphasis as possible and they can save money in times of recession. So we can see that the external factors, in this case recession, can affect the size, because in the case of recession there will be layoffs, and the focus of the department, because in the case of recession there will be more of a focus on cost control than there will be in times of booming economy, we imagine. Okay, so that's the business environment. Let's scroll along now to organizational strategy and see how this affects the structure of the finance function. And here we're talking about the overall strategy of the organization. And it too, just like we saw with business environment, may affect the size and the focus of the finance function. So let's imagine we've got a strategy for an organization and it's a cost leader strategy. Now, a cost leader strategy is when an organization aims to produce its products or its services as cheaply as possible, and it aims to do it more cheaply than its competition, because if it's producing its products or services more cheaply than its competition, it can either pass those savings on to its customers, and it'll be offering the cheapest products or services on the market, and that should grow its market share, or it can retain those savings in the business, and so it'll be increasing its profit margins because it will be producing its goods or services cheaper than anyone else in the market. And so if it's selling at the same price as everyone else in the market, there'll be a far higher profit margin. So that's the cost leader strategy. Now let's imagine an organization is following a cost leader strategy. So one of their aims may be to automate as much of the finance function as possible, and to keep staff numbers down, or perhaps it may be to outsource to low-cost providers where possible. Now, we're going to focus on outsourcing in a later section, but all those ideas are linked to reducing costs associated with the finance function. We can see how that would fit in with the cost leader strategy. So again, we can see a direct impact from organizational strategy to the structure of the finance function. We can see how finance function may be changing. Let's move on down now to organizational structure. So this is referring to the structure of the organization as a whole, functional, divisional, or matrix. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail here about structures of organizations because we have videos which have a lot of information on these structures in this series. So the structure of the organization can affect the structure of the finance function. So for example, on screen we've got the idea of a divisional structure. Now let's imagine we've got a multinational company, and so in each country it operates in, it's got a different division. And in each of those divisions, it's going to have different functions. So it's going to have an HR function, it's going to have a production function, it's going to have a marketing function, and it's going to have a finance function. So in a divisional structure, we're going to see multiple finance functions. So again, we can see how a structure of an organization is directly impacting on the structure of the finance function. Okay, let's go to our fourth of these things that need to be taken into consideration when thinking about the structuring or restructuring of the finance function, and that is the life cycle stage. And here we're talking about the life cycle stage of the organization. So let's imagine it's just starting out. Well, if it's just starting out, it's only going to need a very small, simply structured finance function. But once the organization starts to grow, it's going to need a larger function. It's going to grow alongside the organization. It's going to need a larger finance function, my apologies, because it's going to have to grow alongside the organization. And because it's growing in size, it's most likely that the finance function is going to become more complex. Okay, so they're the four things that need to be taken into consideration when structuring or changing the structure of the finance function. What we're going to look at now is shared service centers and the finance function. And we already mentioned in one of our examples, I think when we were talking about the business environment, how recession may change the shape of the finance function in a bid to cut costs. And often, a reconfiguration of the finance function is because there is a drive in the organization to reduce costs. And one way to do this is the section we're looking at now, a shared service center. So let's get a formal definition of a shared service center up on screen. A shared service center is a provision of a service by one part of an organization where that service had previously been found in more than one part of the organization. So if you remember earlier on, I talked about divisions, and if we had a multinational company, for example, they may have a division in every country that they operate in. And in each of those divisions was a finance function. Now, with a shared service center, that would involve bringing those different finance teams that are in different divisions around the organization and bringing them together in a centralized department. So let's bring up a visual aid to show you what I mean. Okay, so we've got our different finance functions in different areas of the world. We've got our Asian finance function at the top, our European finance function, and American finance functions at the bottom. Now, with a shared service center, we're bringing our finance teams out of those different geographical areas and bring them together in one shared service center, a centralized department. Now, let's have a look at the advantages and disadvantages for doing that. Well, firstly, as I've already referenced, it's seen as lower cost because everything is in one place. So let's have a look at, think about the administrative costs and the office costs. Well, we don't suddenly have multiple office costs because it's all come together in one shared service center. And so we have less administrative costs because all the information doesn't have to be passed around the world or have different teams perhaps working on duplicate documents. Another advantage is there's greater organizational focus because it's able to see the whole picture of the organization and focus as the strategy as a whole rather than focusing on different divisional strategies, for example. And because there's central control, it's more likely to be run smoothly rather than lots of different teams, for example, working around the world, in which case things might not run as efficiently. And there's shared expertise because everyone working in this team can share their knowledge rather than that knowledge being divided up into different teams that perhaps don't communicate that much. But there are also disadvantages to shared service centers. So we talked about this idea of divisional structure and how we may have a different division in each country. But of course, if you've got a different division, in each country, it stands to reason they're more likely to have local knowledge. By, of course, bringing that team out of that area and putting them in a shared service center, it may harm public opinion or any strategic alliances as they lack knowledge in local business needs. Now, I'm giving the example throughout this of divisions based being in different countries. That's not necessarily the case. It's just an example I'm using here. Okay, let's look at our next disadvantage, which is could lead to errors, because although the shared service center are now kind of one team, they've still got to service the needs of these different divisions. And now suddenly they're not going to know so much about them because they're not working as closely as with them before, which could lead to errors. And also it takes away control from the divisional managers and centralizes. Now, for those of you that have seen the video on divisional structures, you'll be aware one of the advantages of the divisional structures is that it motivates managers because they have a lot more responsibility and control. And of course, by taking these finance functions, and putting them in shared service centers, you are taking away that advantage of divisional structures, and managers may feel less valued than they previously did. Okay, so there's advantages and disadvantages of these shared service centers. So there we go, that's today's short, bite-sized revision guide to the E1 syllabus. Hopefully you can understand the changes to the structure and the organisation of the finance function, and a brief introduction to the shared service centres, which also comes up a lot in various places through the E1 syllabus. So thank you very much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and if you have, why not like this video? Why not subscribe to our channel to make sure you keep getting these videos? And good luck with your revision.